Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. I want to start talking about an application called Encryptpad. Now, this is an application that serves a unique purpose for me. I have plenty of text editors I like. I've been bouncing between Sublime Text for a local text editor. I even use Kate for a lot of smaller tasks. And of course, recently, I have switched almost all of my note-taking / cloud notes over to CodeMD. And that's been the case for show prep and stuff like that. But there was a niche, there was a specific need that has been left out, and that is with encrypted text. How do you store things like bank information? How do you store things that aren't necessarily passwords, but need almost basically the same protection as passwords? And so I've looked around for a couple of different applications to solve this for me, and one of the ones that I've been using for years as my personal journaling app is Lithograph. And so I've tried using a different lithograph document that I've encrypted with a separate password to store some information, and that worked okay. I've tried creating encrypted containers using Veracrypt and or just specifying a block, creating a block and then encrypting that block with ext4 and LUKS, and that's worked okay too. But Encryptpad is basically, it's a simple text editor with encryption. And so it can view or edit encrypted text, and it's able to encrypt and decrypt binary files such as images, videos, archives, and it uses the most widely chosen quality file format, OpenPGP. Unlike other applications that use asymmetric encryption, the primary focus of Encryptpad is symmetric encryption. They also have a very unique command line tool called CLI. And Encrypt-CLI is a cross-platform. It supports Windows, Mac, and Linux. It supports both passphrase and key file protection, or a combination of both. It has a customizable passphrase generator for generating strong random passphrases. And again, like I say, support for binary file encryption. They also have a unique mode called read-only mode that avoids accidental modification of an encrypted document. So, for example, I have my routing numbers and my bank account numbers. Now, when I first create the document, of course, I have to be able to edit them and enter in all of the information. But then once that's there, it's really just a function of referencing, and I just need to be able to copy and paste. I certainly don't ever want to modify those documents. Pat phrases are not kept in memory. Rather, they're only salted in 52K or S2K, excuse me. Results are stored. It supports multiple cipher algorithms, CAST5, triple DES, AES-128, and AES-256. So if you're looking for a simple note taking application, simple note text editor, that supports encryption, I highly recommend you give Encryptpad a look. And not only is it a fantastic little application, it also supports all of the dark theming and looks really, really good in a dark environment, something that I have to say Lithograph didn't do. So Encryptpad will have more information for you in the show notes. They're also, and this is really interesting, when it comes to security-based software, obviously the security of how you obtain the software is kind of important, right? And so on their GitHub page, they actually have an integrity verification procedure that you can follow to ensure that the software that you're getting out of the repository is in fact valid software and genuine software. And so a huge props to the team that has put this together. I'm kind of surprised, to be honest with you. I've not run into it in the past, but I have now, and I'm very happy. So it's become my new default if I just have a piece of information I have to save, why wouldn't you do that with encryption? Again, the phones are open tonight, 855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. So we are in the full throes of Red Hat Summit. Now, the interesting thing is, you might remember, Red Hat Summit traditionally alternates between the East Coast and the West Coast. And this year, given the health crisis that has taken over the nation and most of the world, they have opted to do a virtual summit. And so they are going to be meeting virtually over the internet. And you might say to yourself, well, that might start to draw people away from attending Red Hat Summit. But turns out, Comier said earlier that this year's summit is the biggest one yet, with more than 38,000 registrations. So, of course, we are continuing to watch what's coming out of Red Hat Summit, and we'll condense it down. Essentially, it comes down to three things that are of importance as of today, and that is OpenShift 4.4 release, the advanced cluster management for Kubernetes, and the OpenShift virtualization. We'll talk more about all of those coming up throughout the episode. So if you're running cloud native applications at scale, those can be difficult to manage, particularly if they are in if they're spread up over a bunch of separate Kubernetes clusters. And to help, Red Hat has announced its advanced cluster management platform for Kubernetes. And essentially, this capability is going to let people manage both Kubernetes clusters themselves and the applications with, as they put it, a really rich lifecycle capability, so that they can start operating their Kubernetes and OpenShift clusters at scale from a single place. The real world implications are simply that you're going to be able to manage all these clusters all in one place: OpenShift, AWS, so on and so forth. And the other thing that they're trying to address is when you have an infrastructure that is dynamic, and you have to scale or respond to increasing or decreasing workflow and demand, it's typically faster than what a human can actually implement changes. And so what they have done is they've gone to a policy-based management where you can establish the policies rather than trying to respond dynamically to the situation. And so it allows you to spin up or take down infrastructure according to the needs of your customers or your clients or whoever your end users are. And so if all of this works out the way that Red Hat is presenting it and demonstrating it to work out, and I have no reason that it wouldn't, or at least I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't, this is a really big change. If you're a person that manages Kubernetes clusters, this is a major tool in your toolbox. And so Red Hat has, unsurprisingly, devoted a lot of time to talking about this and explaining it, and I won't recover what they've talked about, but I encourage you to go back and watch some of the content that is coming out of Red Hat Summit. And but this is really exciting, and it's great to see that the money that IBM has spent to acquire Red Hat is being put in direct use to creating open source tools and utilities that directly benefit the people that have signed up to leverage their infrastructure on top of Red Hat. ThinkPads are going to be shipping with Fedora. You'll soon be able to get a Fedora pre-installed with Fedora. You'll soon be able to get a ThinkPad pre-installed with Fedora by selecting it as you customize your purchase. Now, this is a pilot program of Lenovo's Linux Community Series. They're going to start with Fedora Edition, beginning with the ThinkPad P1 Gen 2, the ThinkPad P5, the P53, the ThinkPad X1 Carbon Generation 8, and possibly expanding into other lines as they move into the future. Now, a little backstory for you. IBM originally made the ThinkPad, then the ThinkPad line, and they made the ThinkServer, they made the ThinkPad, and they made the ThinkCenter, I think, which was their desktop. And they sold their computer line to Lenovo. And they've always had a close working relationship with Lenovo. I have a family member that actually works at IBM, has for years, and even after they sold off the line, they still internally kept using them and maintained a very close relationship with Lenovo. Well, unsurprisingly, as IBM has now acquired Red Hat, who, by the way, was always using ThinkPads because they just run Linux out of the box better than any other brand that you can buy off the shelf, Lenovo has started to, IBM has started to put some pressure on Lenovo to say, hey, what would be really great is if we can get these laptops out. And so Matt Miller and the team with Fedora has been working with Lenovo, and they have come to an agreement and struck a deal in which Lenovo is going to provide the hardware for Fedora. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first hardware ever to ship supporting Fedora out of the box. Of course, Lenovo, Dell, HP, and others have supported Red Hat Enterprise Linux running on their server platforms because, of course, that's very popular. But up until now, you've not been able to ever purchase a desktop or a laptop with Fedora. And so this is a big moment for not only Fedora, but for Red Hat at large. And as a longtime Fedora user, I've used every version of Fedora since Fedora Core 1. And before that, I was using Red Hat 9 and 8 and 7 and 6 and 5 before that, right? This is interesting because obviously Fedora and the team at Fedora have always focused on creating an installer and an installation process that can replace another operating system and make that barrier to entry very easy. But this is a game changer because what this allows people to do is to walk into a store or go onto a website and order a computer, a major brand of computer, I might add, with Linux. A lot of people out there are listening to this and they're saying to themselves, well, what about Entroware? What about System 76? What about, there is a laundry list of places that do manufacture computers specifically for Linux. And certainly if you want to support the community, you should purchase a laptop from one of those vendors. I don't think it would be anything shocking to say that there is no amount of Linux users that are going to purchase or not purchase a Lenovo laptop that are going to drastically change the outcome of this pilot program. But be that as it may, you have businesses that are looking to purchase computers, and many of them could probably fulfill their business requirements with Fedora or Ubuntu or even Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But right now, they don't have the option of purchasing from a hardware vendor, and that puts up some barriers because what you wind up with is a situation in which you install a third-party operating system, and then all of a sudden your hardware vendor tells you, well, we can't really support that because you put a third-party operating system on there, and they go back to the third-party operating system. They say, well, we didn't know about that particular model of computer. It has this particular Wi-Fi card or that particular Bluetooth chip in it, and so we don't really know why this distro doesn't work on there. And so obviously we do the best we can as a community, but it works for people at home. It works for hobbyists. It works for enthusiasts. It even works in the business sphere as long as you have somebody to manage the thing. But if you're a business and you don't know anything about Linux, and the guy at Lenovo tells you, well, you have this option for X amount of dollars and a Windows license, and then you'll have a Windows computer, and it will come with all of the advantages and disadvantages of Windows, or you could go over here to this other platform, and this other platform has increased security, increased stability, increased software availability at a lower price point. Yeah, that starts to sound pretty appealing to a business owner, I would think. Mark Pearson, senior Linux developer from Lenovo, said, Lenovo, and quote, Lenovo is excited to become a part of the Fedora community. We want to ensure an optimal Linux experience on our products, and we're committed to working with and learning from the open source community. Couple things that we have learned over the past few years. People want inexpensive, reliable, secure computers. It started back in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, when people were trying to get off of Windows onto some other platform. And of course, at that time, there was a push to try to pull people into the Linux desktop. But the Linux desktop was not ready for the enterprise. It certainly wasn't ready for the home user. And so the natural progression then was to go to MacBooks. But what you've seen in the last 4 to 5 years is actually maybe even going back a little longer than that, you watched a transition into the netbook era where a lot of people had a little netbook with them. And again, you run into this problem of, yes, Linux ran on those netbooks. In fact, a couple of them came pre-installed with Linux. But here's the problem. Unless you want to be a part-time IT guy to your family and friends, you don't recommend that. You don't recommend that they purchase the Asus EPC, I think was one of the first ones that came pre-installed with Linux. Why? Because you don't want to be the support guy for the next 2 years or 3 years or however long that machine is kicking around. And so what that does is it rules out grandpa, it rules out dad, it rules out your best friend from using Linux sometimes. And so a lot of those people pushed their loved ones and friends and so on and so forth and said, hey, just get a Mac. And then people went to Chromebooks. And this is kind of where we are now, is we have entered an era in which if you walk into Best Buy and you walk into Office Max or Office Depot or whatever your big box electronics store is, and you say to yourself or say to the salesman, I want a computer that is going to let me edit some Word documents, view some pictures, browse Facebook, play a couple of online games just inside the web browser kind of a thing. And that's basically what I use my laptop for. Not an unsurprising use case in 2020. In fact, a lot of people have that specific use case. And maybe if they use it for their job, then maybe they write a couple of emails and they might need to edit some documents or maybe put together a presentation. All of those things can be done on a Chromebook. You know what else all those things can be done on? A Pinebook. And when I got my Pinebook for $200 and pulled it out and started using it, I realized how much power can really be packed into a low-cost computer. And that thing charges with Type-C. So I'm going to use the same accessories that I would use on any higher-end computer. I have the same general experience from a user interface and security and stability standpoint. Certainly I have the same experience from a cost standpoint or less. And the computer ran really well. And so what that tells me is that the vast majority of people for their day-to-day computing needs would be able to use something like a Linux distro. And this is something I've been saying for years, since back in the Linux Action Show days. Go out and convince people, hey, look at this, sit down in front of it and use it. And what do you think? And what you find when you actually go out on the street and take a laptop and preload it with Linux and open it up and set it in front of them is, yeah, I can get all of my stuff done on this thing. How much is it? Where do I buy one? And right now, we don't have an answer to that. And as the Dells of the world start shipping Ubuntu, and of course, a System 76 continues to grow in size and scope. And now you have a third player, and that is Lenovo. And I think this is particularly, a particular landmark from the standpoint that Red Hat, the company, has been purchasing ThinkPads for years, thousands of them. I mean, it's their standard issue laptop to their employees. And of course, when Red Hat takes these in, they load Red Hat. I think they call it the Corporate Standard Build, or CSB. And it's basically a version of Red Hat tailored specifically for them. And so what ends up happening is they don't have support from their own hardware company to make sure the software that they manufacture works on the hardware that they're paying for. So they have begun to rectify that relationship. And I tell you what, it could not have come at a better time. It really could not have. Because I can't remember exactly how I got into the discussion, but I got into discussion on the latest version of macOS, which is 10.15. And essentially, what they have done is there's been a slow progression to try to merge macOS and iOS. And they're trying to make it easy for developers to create Mac apps from the iPad apps that they already have created. And the idea is that they'll run natively alongside the existing Mac apps so that you can just drag and drop between them, and they'll take advantage of the larger screen and the more powerful architecture and all of those things. And it's really kind of a brilliant move from Apple because it allows them to capitalize on what is a dying laptop desktop world and instead focus the buzz on their mobile experience, which is considered by many to be quite good. And that comes at a cost to anybody who values privacy, values freedom, and wants to get real work done. And I'll give you an example of that. And again, not a lot of experience, so I'm sure there's probably ways to get around all of these things, but just in the 15, 20 minutes that I've played with it, any command that needs to run or touch the file system, you have to give it permission. And so you're constantly bombarded with all of these little pop-ups. They also replaced ZSH. They also replaced the bash with ZSH. So every time you log in, it lets you know that it's been replaced. macOS also only runs in a read-only volume, and so it's separate from all of your other data. And of course, they see this as a security thing. I see it again as more walls going up in the walled garden. And then they have a program called Gatekeeper that ensures that new apps that you install have been checked for quote-unquote known security issues before you can run them. So you're quote-unquote always using good software. Or, NOAA translation, you're only using software that we say you can use on the device that you paid $2,500 for. And that's all fine and well if you want to live inside of the walled garden of Apple. But the second you want to step out of the garden, the second that you want to go do your own thing, all of a sudden it becomes problematic. And so, Lenovo isn't going to continue to ship the hardware unless Fedora has the software dialed in. So the way that I see this working out is that the accountability on both sides increases. Fedora can't ship software unless they have a reason to believe that it's going to work on Lenovo ThinkPads. And you better believe with an agreement like this in place, they're going to be paying a lot of attention to what Lenovo's lineup is, what hardware is going in there, and they're going to be making sure that when the wireless card and the Bluetooth card and whatever else it is comes out, that they have properly tested and patched and so on and so forth towards that laptop. This again goes back to my argument to why we need to focus more on LTSs and less on rolling releases. It gives everybody a fixed target to focus on. When Lenovo comes out and says, here's the 9th gen X1 Carbon, here it is, and it's going to have an Intel XYZ card, it's going to have a Bluetooth XYZ card, it's going to have the touch reader from XYZ manufacturer, and it's going to have this particular screen and this particular chipset and this particular motherboard, to say on and on and on, right? The developers then have a fixed target to work after, and then when they release the software, we know that that software is going to work with that particular piece of hardware. And this, again, this entirely prevents this whole, well, you installed the third operating system, there's nothing we can do to help as your hardware guy. Well, you installed it on an unsupported piece of software, there's nothing we can do as your distro guy. It keeps everybody held to a higher standard. And the critical thing here is that I think has been missing, and maybe it's not missing, maybe it's here, and it just hasn't been elaborated or talked about in any of the articles that I found pertaining to Lenovo making laptops for Fedora. But I want to ask the question, what is the financial arrangement back to Fedora? Because if that question hasn't been answered, or if it has been answered in the form of, well, they make software, and so if they want us to sell our laptops with their software on it, that's fine, but we're not giving anything back. To me, that's problematic. Lenovo is now going to make money on every laptop they ship, and that laptop will ship with a GPL license to use the software written by some of the best software engineers in the world. And Fedora is proudly advertising for Lenovo and saying, hey, you know what? They agreed to our terms, because Lenovo didn't just stomp in there and say, well, we're going to ship Fedora, but we're going to make this change and that change and make sure that this particular driver is installed. And even the NVIDIA card doesn't ship with the NVIDIA card driver. The software that comes on these laptops is only the software that's coming out of the Fedora repository. So this is staying true to an open source nature and an open source belief system. But I want to see money coming back to the Fedora project. Why? Because Lenovo has a vested interest in selling hardware. That's where they make their money. But if you want people in Fedora and you want the developers to spend time fixing the issues on the laptops that you're selling, then I think they have an obligation to fund that development to some extent. And to what extent, I will leave up to the Fedora management team in Lenovo. But I hope that there is some monetary flow from a grateful hardware company that now has a much better software partner than Microsoft. If you are in the market for a laptop, I cannot possibly recommend Lenovo enough. I have I believe this is a 7th gen X1 Carbon, and it has by far been the best laptop I have ever purchased in my entire life. And I've owned a lot of laptops. The overall build construction of Lenovo is just top notch. But on top of that, the way that they look at building computers and how it fits into enterprise just doesn't compare with other manufacturers. And that's not to say I don't like the Dells or System 76s or others of the world. But if you look at what is available in terms of Thunderbolt docking, in terms of an Ethernet card that shares the same MAC address, so no matter what you're plugged into, if you're using MAC stickies and so on and so forth, things that happen on a corporate network, those things are transparent no matter if your laptop is in or out of the dock. Those are the kind of things, those are the kind of decisions that Lenovo makes that I look back and go, well, that's really fantastic that they were thinking about this and on top of it. By the way, the battery life just can't be beat. I mean, I charge this thing at night, I unplug it during the day, I run it all day long. I don't think I really ever look for a power adapter until I get home at night, plug it into the dock while it rests up while I sleep. So 2 thumbs way up from me if you're looking at getting a laptop. Just make sure to order that puppy with Fedora pre-installed. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Public money, public code. This is something that the FSF has been talking about. And essentially, it is a program that forbids the sharing and exchange of publicly funded, it encourages the sharing and exchange of publicly funded code. And the idea is to make it so that if your tax dollars are paying for a particular project or a particular government software implementation, that code should be open source because the people that paid for it should also have access to it. And some of the problems that they've run up with trying to use proprietary software, proprietary companies are it expressly forbids the sharing of exchanging publicly funded code. It also prevents corporations or cooperation between public administration and the people who are actually footing the bill. It also supports monopolies by hindering competition, and as a result, many administrations become dependent on just a handful of companies. And so this is a major threat to the security of digital infrastructure. And by forbidding access to the source code, it makes fixing backdoors and security holes extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible. So the Netherlands has been kicking this around, and they have made a decision that they will commit to open source by default. In an open letter to Parliament, the Dutch Minister for Internal Affairs, Raymond Knops, commits to free software by default policy and underlines its benefits for society. Current market regulation shall be rewarded to allow publishing free software by the government. Now, it's not all roses and candy because they do make a couple of very important exceptions here. One of the exceptions is to be made for information that could compromise national or government security or information that could be considered a privacy risk. Now, I have a problem with that to a certain extent because if your software is coded properly, you shouldn't have to worry about it being a risk to government security, right? We should not. Security by obscurity is no security at all. And what I take from that is, and why I think that's a very dangerous thing to put in there, is because it allows the government to say something like, we are going to close source this because this is the thing that we use to capture people's information or to spy on people or to, whatever it is. And if you're doing something, if a government official is doing something with tax money from the citizenry, that thing should be out in the open. They should be aware of what that thing is doing. And again, if you look at that and saying, well, that could give somebody unauthorized access to something, well, now you have a bigger security problem to worry about than the fact that your code is open. It's not the fact that your code is open that's a problem. It's the fact that you have poorly written code. And so you should go back and hire a proper open source developer that can write proper code. The code to Lux is open. I don't worry that my laptop is not functioning properly or is not secure because I use an open source encryption scheme. We just talked about Encryptpad. OpenPGP is open. It's an open standard. It's open source. There's no reason to believe that Encryptpad is not secure just because the code is open source. I don't buy this argument that there are certain programs that can't be open source because they could compromise national security or government security. I do believe it might compromise the government's ability to spy on people, and I think that should come out. The other thing is it might not, one of the comments that was made was that it's not worth taking on the additional effort of converting existing software into free software. And so the idea was that they're primarily targeting this product, or they're primarily targeting this project towards new software development. And there's no such thing as software that you just spin up and then it exists, right? It either has to be maintained, it has to continue to be developed, or it has to be replaced. Now, is replacing a piece of software more expensive than maintaining it? Absolutely it is. However, if you have no plans to replace your software and you're just kicking the can down the road with perpetual maintenance and upkeep and so on and so forth, the entire expenditure of that maintenance gets passed off to the tax base. Whereas in an open source model, when LibreOffice comes out with the new version of LibreOffice, even if it doesn't address a specific concern that you, the government of Netherlands, have, you still get to take advantage of that fix that came down the pipe. And likewise, if in a magic world where Noah controls things, all governments that were using public money were using open code. When the United States government comes up with the Tor network, which they did, Navy did, and they release this out, and now all of a sudden the Netherlands can use it. They're going to fix these security holes and the things that would be a threat to government security. They get patched, and every other government gets to take advantage of that for free. Rising tides, everybody goes up. And this is the model, this is the fundamental model I'm preaching to the choir to a certain extent, because this is the model that has made the Linux operating system so successful. And so I don't agree with the exception for privacy and for government security. I don't necessarily agree that we should abandon trying to convert all existing software, although I will admit he said it might not be worth taking on the additional risk. And the new procurement policy will also be adopted free software by default. So the government and its institutions will actively start to publish free software. And the minister is going to report on the progress of this at the beginning of 2021. But I'm excited to live in a world in which a government is going to use their tax base to fund an open source project to solve a problem and then give that information to the world so that anybody can use it. I think that's very cool. So congratulations, Netherlands, for doing a great job and moving the ball forward. I think it's when articles like this come out or when stories like this come out, I kind of look back and, we're all kind of still burned by Munich and say, well, maybe they got it wrong. Maybe that's the answer there. Again, 855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. She hasn't had a chance to call screen yet, but I'll take you anyway. You're on Ask Noah. Good evening.
Hey, Noah. My name's Matt, and I was wondering if you were still playing around with Zamad.
I am, yes.
Awesome. I was curious how that's going for you. I started playing with it recently, too, and really like it.
Yeah, it's not in production. It's just we're just using it on the side. And what I have found, so let's get everybody caught up to the same place. So Zamad is a open source ticket system, and we are evaluating it internally at Altispeed Technologies to see if it's something we'd like to replace OS Ticket with. And what I'm finding is the interface is remarkably better than OS Ticket in terms of a modern and sleek appearance. What it makes up for, though, in appearance, I think it lacks in functionality. I think, they do have a knowledge base, but OS Ticket has so many granular controls that allow you to tie into a lot of other things. And a lot of that stuff, like internal tasks and project delegation and stuff like that do not seem to be present in Zamad. And so it's really more of a help desk software than a full-blown IT management software, which is kind of what we're using OS Ticket for. And so, internally, what we're talking about doing is just using other solutions to circumvent that. But overall, I think that ultimately Zamad is what we're going to go for with our help desk going forward at some point. I just don't know what date that's going to be.
All right, cool.
What have you? Can I ask what you found?
Open project.
Can I ask what you found with it?
I found it seems like it was better for people like you who are like an external IT company. I found things like GitLab would work better internally. I really wish it had Kanban support, but then I thought about it and was like, Kanban doesn't work when you have a bunch of clients. It works really well when you have like different business units inside of a company.
Right. Yeah, very much so.
But yeah, and the email interface, was much better in Zamad than what else I've seen. It was really easy to set up the connector, and it was like support at domain.com rather than GitLab, where it's support plus API key, which just looks like gibberish to users at domain.com.
Yeah, I'll tell you something as it relates to OS Ticket. One thing that always kind of bugged me is so the way that it works by default is if you don't set up an external scheduler, OS Ticket will only check the mailbox if there is an active user logged in. So if somebody from the company, from the support company is logged in as a support technician, then it will check the mailbox every time or whatever you set the thing to. If not, you have to set up an external scheduler. And I always found that kind of strange that the way the software works by default is if I'm not logged into the system, that is the most critical time for you to tell me that a ticket has come in and I'm not seeing it. If I'm logged in, I can just see it myself. So stuff like that was always a little frustrating to me. And again, those are the kind of things that seem to be totally worked out in Zamad. Again, though, at the expense of a lot of granularity and control.
Fair. And then you were probably thinking about pairing it with something like Open Project for the more project management side stuff, or
Open Project, we've got a couple different ones that we're looking at. We've even looked at. I can't think of the one that I can't think of it. It kind of caught me off guard. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But we had 2 or 3 of them. That one was two or three of them were a project management system, and then a couple of them were actually customer management solutions. And we were playing around to see what we would pass off. But a lot of what I'm getting back from our employees is that when they're working on a project, for the most part, they're using their own tooling for that. So they have Sublime Text open or Kate open or whatever it is, and they're just dumping information. And then when they get done, they compile it all together and then put it into, wherever it goes. And so for that, we may just go to an internal wiki. And that may be the most efficient way for us anyway to store that information, because for the most part we're just documenting stuff, right? We're documenting IP schemes and we're documenting diagrams, and we've recently started taking pictures now of every rack that we work on. And so if we add a new piece of equipment to a rack or we pull something out, then the picture gets updated. So the idea being, if you're sitting back in the shop, you get a trouble call, and all of a sudden you look, at least the engineer who's working in the back can look and go, oh yeah, let's see what the rack physically looks like. Let's see what these connections are physically doing, and he can pull that picture up. So we've started doing stuff like that, and those are the kind of things that even outgrow what OS Ticket it was really designed for. It's not that it's not a good piece of software. It's just I'm pushing it beyond what it's capable of, and it's not even in the same planet as what Zamad is designed to do. So for all of those reasons, we are probably going to split that out, and the help desk will just be the help desk, and all of the management documentation stuff will be on a separate thing.
Awesome. Do you have any wikis that are front running for you for that, or?
Yeah, we're using
wikis that.
Yeah, we right now we're using MediaWiki right now because, frankly, we spun up 3 simultaneous instances. We spun up a instance back in January. We spun up an instance for internal stuff, and then I duplicated that at my home. So that I could write articles, or I could write knowledge-based things, and then I could just copy the code from one to the other. Then I think it was end of February, early April, we launched the Linux Delta Wiki, and so all 3 of those are running MediaWiki. The idea originally being that we could just copy and paste content between the 3. But as this kind of progresses, and we're finding more and more needs for how we're going to document customer side stuff, we may end up looking at some other wiki solutions as well. One of the issues about wikis, like, there are so many of them out there, and they all do something different better than the other one. To include Confluence, which is just very prevalent in the IT sphere, even if it isn't open source. So,
all right, cool. I didn't have any other questions. Thanks for answering.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the call. Again, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Colonel calls. Hey, Colonel, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, so 2 things. One, is there a way that I can call in via Mumble?
Yeah, you bet. Jump in Mumble, and then what we ask people to do is just shoot me a message in the IRC. That's Ask Noah Show in Freenode, and just say, hey, I've got something to say, and I'll pull you up. Yeah, you could join Mumble Intime. In fact, it sounds way better.
Yeah, well, and actually that's how I normally listen to the show. Second, and this follows on to Mumble, there is a community meetup, a virtual lug of sorts. We're calling it the LUP Lug, and it meets the same time as Linux Unplugged airs, but on Sunday. So that would be noon Pacific, and we're using the same Mumble room. We're just in the lobby.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me know. I appreciate it. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I didn't know if any of your listeners who aren't Linux Unplugged listeners might want to join us. But, we start around noon Pacific, and this last Sunday we went all the way to, I think it was like 10 or 11 Pacific.
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, people jump in and out as they can.
That's really cool. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I wish I could join. Unfortunately, I have this other show I do on Sundays called Destination Linux, and so I'm over there hanging out between noon and 3. So unfortunately, I won't be able to join you. But I'm glad that there are people that are doing stuff like this, particularly during COVID. I think it's a particularly nice time to start moving some of these things virtually and try to move the community that direction. Again, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Ubuntu 2004 has been released, Focal Fossa, and it has been released with GNOME 3.36. This is the default desktop. It is the latest LTS, and so, of course, I'm recommending that people upgrade. Now, this is one of the best releases I've seen from Canonical since the change over to GNOME. They're still shipping with X, as I would expect them to, as Wayland still hasn't really been entirely worked out. Snaps are everywhere. The software store has been replaced by the Snap Store. And here's what I have noticed in using 2004. Now, I guess a couple of disclaimers. My testing machine is an HP ProBook. What is this thing? I don't know, but it has an i5 5200, 8 gigs of RAM. It has an SSD, and the overall speed of the desktop seems like it's a little snappier. Mostly, what I have seen is that there is a lot of polish. One of the things that made Unity the best desktop environment of its day was the fact that Canonical crawled into every little corner and fixed tiny little things, and so everything was just very cohesive. And I can't count the number of times that I heard somebody tell me, "Hey, there's just not a lot going on with Ubuntu. Nothing ever changes. It seems like it's more of the same." But I didn't back then agree, and I still don't agree that was ever the case. I think Canonical did a very excellent job at maintaining Unity to give it a lot of polish. And I think what you see on 2004 is that level of polish beginning to be applied to the GNOME desktop. And understand that Canonical's hands to a certain degree are tied, because not every change that they want to make to the GNOME desktop is going to be approved by the GNOME folks. And so they have to make a decision at some point. Is this the hill we want to die on, or do we just want to go along to get along for the purpose of we don't want to have to maintain our own separate fork of GNOME? And so I can't tell you which of these changes are to be attributed to the GNOME team and which changes of these are to be attributed to the Ubuntu team. All I can tell you is that Ubuntu 2004 is a very polished distro, and it starts right away when you boot the thing up. The very first thing you're going to notice when you boot into the installer is, again, they have made ZFS en route a option, and this makes it just a radio button. Now, they say it's experimental, so take that for what it's worth. However, plenty of people are using ZFS en route in production, number one. Number two, they wouldn't have even included the experimental feature, I believe, in an LTS if it wasn't reliable enough. So I went ahead and installed ZFS en route. One of the things I was kind of disappointed was you forego the option of encrypting your hard drive if you do ZFS en route. Now, maybe there's some way to drop below into a command prompt or do something by hand. I'm not sure, but what I can tell you is that you can encrypt the drive with Lux on top of LVM, but there did not seem to be a way to install ZFS en route and encrypt. So that's kind of a sad thing that I have to pick between those two, but hopefully that will be changed down the road, and I'm sure there's a very good reason that wasn't included. When you get into the logon screen, gone is the stupid swipe thing that really looks like it was designed for a tablet that never was, and replaced is a little animation that goes from your name to the password. And they've also similarly changed the logout options, again, from the tablet that never was, where I don't remember what you clicked on, to be honest with you. I think you had to hold Alt or something like that to get a list of other options to come out. But now you just click out logout, and you have the option and the opportunity to do that. They are including exFAT support, so that if you have larger file sizes that are on an exFAT memory card, a lot of new digital video cameras are coming with that, and WireGuard, the new simplified, widely available VPN service or VPN protocol that we had the lead developer Jason Donafield on last week, with up-to-date cryptography and sane defaults. It's included in 2004, and they're also going to backport WireGuard to 1804. In a statement, WireGuard creator Jason Donafield said, including WireGuard by default in all recent versions of Ubuntu means that users will finally have a great out-of-the-box secure tunnel on Ubuntu. And, of course, as I said, ZFS now supports the latest version of the Oracle-based file system and includes disk encryption and performance enhancements. So snaps, again, everywhere. Replace the software store with the Snap Store. They are more secure, and that's because they are strictly confining Snap programs to the containers. And so a badly behaving app can't impact the overall operating system. And, right now I would still tell you that snaps are a little give and take. Some of them are great to use. I found that the YouTube DL snap offers, I find, have far less problems with it than I have if I install it right from the repo. I have found a lot of issues with, I've had issues with the Telegram snap. My son had an issue with the Minecraft installer snap. So they're not perfect yet. And certainly if you're a person that's very sensitive to themes and looks, a lot of the snap packages, because of the way that the confinement works, are not currently respecting your themes. And so that can be problematic if that's something that you care about. Canonical is also taking security to the next level. 2004 includes native support for AMD secure encrypted virtualization with accelerated memory encryption designed for data in use protection, as well as high performance scaling for AMD EPYC processors with 256 threads and beyond. There's a kernel lockdown mode. This optional Linux security module keeps preventing the root account from working with kernel code in some instances, and it also makes it much harder for compromised root accounts to compromise the entire system. It incorporates a kernel self-protection. This is a variety of improvements designed to protect against kernel security flaws, and they've included a secure boot utility and secure shell, fast ID online multi-factor authentication, also known as the FIDO standard, which will let a user log into a website without using a password. Now, if you're not following the FIDO 2 standard, this comes back to, we started with two-factor, which is something you have and something you know. FIDO 2 is kind of the evolution of that, and the idea being that if I can just reset my email password, if email is my two-factor, but I can also just reset my password by typing in my email address, and then I go to something I have and then click on a link or whatever, and I can reset the password. Why bother making me log in at all? Why not just have something that I have access to, prove that I have access to that thing, and then you let me into my account? And that's kind of how the FIDO 2 standard works. They've started with little USB keys. YubiKey is one of them. They make the little blue one for $25. And now Ubuntu 2004 is including the FIDO multi-factor authentication with the distro as well. So that's really exciting to see. Support is taking a next level too. Historically, Ubuntu LTS has come with 5 years of support, so you could safely plan on using Ubuntu until 2025. However, they now have an option. If you pay for Ubuntu Advantage, you'll be able to run supported apps for a decade. That would be until 2030. Also, for 30,000 open source applications which previously didn't have support. And so Mark Shuttleworth explained that we're offering a full 10 years of coverage for all packages, including the 30,000 packages that we never previously covered with security updates. This represents a huge improvement in enterprise security. I would also say that it represents a huge improvement in enterprise stability, because as an organization, if I can purchase a computer from Lenovo or Dell and it comes pre-installed with the LTS of Ubuntu, and then I can go purchase a package on top of that from Canonical, and I don't have to touch that machine for 10 years, not only the operating system covered, but if I'm using open source software like every business should be, those are going to be covered too. That's a really, really, really good buy. That's a good deal. And the other thing is, it offers the opportunity for Linux users to be able to tell Canonical and other Linux distro manufacturers, hey, we are willing to pay you if you do good work. And so if you provide support to me, then I will give you money. For gamers, 2004 comes with Feral Interactive Game Mode performance tools, which will be installed by default. Game Mode is a Linux daemon that enables games to request things like more CPU power, I/O priority, and some other optimizations. And so what does this mean for you, the end user? Well, Linux games are going to run much smoother on Ubuntu 2004. Proprietary NVIDIA graphic drivers have also been added for improved graphic performance, and the UI for presenting and selecting these drivers has also been improved. That is to say, you just go into settings, click on additional drivers, and then you you click on the driver that you want to use. Developers, they didn't leave you guys out. Python 3.8 is now the default Python. Python 2.7 has been moved to Universe. It's not included by default in any new installs, and the remaining programs which require Python 2.7 have been updated to use /user/bin/python2 as their interpreter. If you upgrade from a previous release, then user/bin/python will continue to point to Python 2 for compatibility. And for AI and ML developers, Ubuntu supports Kubeflow. Kubeflow allows for users to quickly create, train, and tune neural networks within Kubernetes for dynamic resource provisioning. Kubeflow works well with TensorFlow and other modern AI ML frameworks such as PyTorch, MXNet, and Chainer for allowing users to enhance their existing code and setup. If you're a Windows user, and you're asking, am I left out? No, you're not. WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux on 2004, is available now. Shuttleworth said that WSL enables deep interaction with Linux applications in Windows 10. This offers Windows users first-class engineering workstation experiences within minutes. Accompanying the revamped login screen is a brand new lock screen, and this will not only be easier to use, but it no longer requires you to slide up first to reveal the password field, but has a visual presentation of using a blurred version of the desktop wallpaper. So all in all, a really fantastic release for Canonical. And again, what I would argue is the completion of the transition to the GNOME desktop from Unity, because I feel like I'm back to where I was. It doesn't feel like it's just Ubuntu GNOME, now renamed Ubuntu proper. It feels like Canonical has put their touch on it, and they've done a very, very good job. My testing machine was an HP i5 5200 ProBook, as I said, with 8 gigs of RAM and an SSD. I did have a problem with my wireless card. My wireless AC 3160 was not detected by default, and I couldn't get it to work. So I had to use a USB dongle to connect to Wi-Fi. So I thought I'd throw that in there. Also, had a minor issue, but some of the dialog windows were still light even after changing to the dark mode. So they've added this one-click button. You go into settings, click on dark mode, and it changes everything to dark. And for the most part, that works really, really well. But it misses a couple of things, and one of the things is it doesn't do the dialogues. If you right-click on the desktop, you click on the wireless networks, any of those dialogues are going to show up as a big white window. Additionally, it didn't... GNOME Tweak Tool, which is the tool I would ordinarily use to go through and customize some of those dialog boxes, was not installed by default. And so I'm kind of back to, well, it's almost good out of the box, but I still have to make a couple of tweaks to make it work. Again, not a big deal, but I thought it was something worth mentioning. Again, open phones this hour, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. James calls from Idaho. Hey, James, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Yeah, I ran into a minor issue. I don't know if it's just on this flavor or not. The Mint 19.3 and DOSBox wouldn't do mouse input proper. My only solution, because I couldn't figure out what to do, was roll back to 19.2. And I was wondering if anybody else ran across that, and it might have something to do with X, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, James, what I would tell you to do, I would start by always going to the base distro, right? So starting with something like the latest release of the LTS and see if it works there. If it works there, then I would just use that. If you want to install a different desktop environment on top of that, I would do so. When you start getting into the spins that aren't really spins, it's not really an Ubuntu base, it's a modified Ubuntu base, and Linux Mint specifically makes a lot of changes to their distro. And so if you're having trouble with that, I would encourage you to try to go back to come back to zero, re-zero, and then kind of go from there. Again, 855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Justin writes in and says, hey, Noah, long-time listener, first-time emailer. Have a few questions to ask. I hope these aren't so long, so I'll understand if you can't answer them all on the air. I'm trying to help my sister pick out a laptop to buy for her personal use. She's been using an iPad as her primary device for years, but has recently come to the realization that certain things are better done on a computer. She's open to using Linux, and that is my preference as well. And this is what I use. And it's what I wish to support her on. I have some ideas, but I came across a tech programming background, so my ideas on specs aren't necessarily make sense in this case. Requirements: web browsing, capable of running Audacity. DAW, she's an amateur musician who would like to start doing more recording and also record a podcast together. Ideally, last around 5 years without feeling slow. Sleek, in her words. Question: what laptop or specs would you recommend? It can be new or used, in the $500 to $1,000 range. What distro would you recommend? I'm leaning towards Ubuntu. Previously, she's used Windows and Mac OS, still has Windows for work. What audio interface, mic and MIDI in, would you recommend? I have some experience with Focusrite, which has always worked well. Love to hear your inputs. What's the best way to provide her with support remotely? I live in Illinois. Well, let's see. In order, I would recommend checking out a Lenovo ThinkPad. I think you're going to find that will easily last you 5 years. If you buy it used, you'll be closer to the $500 mark. If you buy it new, you'll be closer to the $1,000 mark. It will meet all of your requirements. If you buy the X1 Carbon specifically, I think she will find that to be a very sleek computer. That's certainly how I would describe it. And as far as what distro, I always recommend, unless you have a reason to do otherwise, stick with Ubuntu. The LTS and whatever the default desktop that Ubuntu ships, because this is what the vast majority of other users who are using Linux are using. And so if she goes online and Googles something or needs support, that's going to be easier. As far as how to support her, I've always recommended Simple Help in the past, and I would still do so if my next suggestion doesn't work out. But there is a new open source competitor to Simple Help that I am actively looking into. It's called Remotely, and I have only played with it for a couple of hours, so I can't give it a full recommendation yet. But it's something I would certainly check into, because I'd always rather have open source software running on my computer with full access than proprietary. We're out of time. That's what the music means. We'll see you next week, 6 p.m. Tuesday.